everyone. Welcome to the third CRA-W Virtual Undergrad Town Hall. This event is made possible with the financial support of the National Science Foundation. My name is Pollock from the University of Delaware, and I have the pleasure of hosting Mandy Pant as our speaker. She will be discussing her research on power delivery systems. So before we get started with the actual event, let me go over some logistics. You can join the event using your computer or your phone or your tablet, just using a WebEx app. If you're having any technical difficulties at any point in time, just submit your questions using the Q&A box. So the Q&A box is there on your right-hand corner. And your questions will be answered by either the speaker during our actual live Q&A session, or throughout the session as a private response directly just to you from one of our helpers during this event. As you can see, that section is there on your right-hand side. So we're also going to be doing some polls during this event. And all you need to do is use the polling section, which is basically at the same point as where the question section was, and we'll let you know when the poll's open. Once the poll actually closes and we've given you some time to answer, then you'll actually get to see the results yourself. So let's actually try our first poll. So the polls are now open. We want to know if you're interested in pursuing undergrad research. Possible answers, you can only pick one, yes, no, or I'm really not sure at this point in time. So go ahead and make your selection in the bottom right corner, and we'll see how this works. If you're having any trouble using the poll tool, you can submit a response in the Q&A section, and somebody will help you. So while we're waiting on some of the poll answers to come in, let me mention some of our CRA-W programs that are actually relevant to undergrad research. If you haven't heard of them, we have the DREW program and the CREW program. That's distributed REU and collaborative REU. If you want to learn more about those, you can go to the website, CRA-W.org. So our results are in. It looks like 75% of you, most of you, are interested in getting into an undergrad research experience. And that is super. So we will, I think, going on to the CRA-W.org site will give you more information about that. So I'm going to go on and actually introduce our speaker for today. So as most of you know, Mandy is from Intel Corporation. She's a lead technology in the area of power delivery and power management. And her research area is in power space, particularly on-chip delivery issues, power management, and power reduction on the next generation server microprocessors. So let's give it over to Mandy.
Mean to avoid an unruly power delivery system. But before I do that, I thought I'd take a couple of minutes and give a little bit of myself, introduce a little bit of myself to you all. So I grew up in India, and the first picture of me is in high school that you see on the left on this. And on the right top, there's a picture of me during my undergrad in college. And so as you can see, I went from an all-girls environment to doing my undergrad in computer science and engineering from IIT Kharagpur in India. And all my classmates were boys. all the professors who are also in the picture who are all men. And so I really was the only girl in my class. And so let's put it this way. Some people say it cannot get better than that. I say it cannot get worse than that. Anyways, okay, so once I finished my undergrad in computer science and engineering, I went on to picking up my master's and PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Georgia Tech. And then I started my career essentially in Compaq for about a year. That company is folded, but the group that I worked for, the Alpha Group, got bought by Intel, and ever since I have been in Intel. I spent most of my Intel career working on products, working on server products, focusing on circuits, power delivery, power management. And in the last couple of years, I have transitioned to something that's closer to my heart, which is research. And I'm the academic research director in Intel Labs, where I work with various universities on areas of strategic importance to Intel in particular, the computing industry in general, and we try to steer the research to make sure that it is relevant. My core skill, as Laurie mentioned, continues to remain in power delivery, and power management, and I have to say I'm happy to be able to continue to spend time working in that area. So with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and give you just a sneak preview on power delivery here. And by no means I'm going to be able to cover a lot of detail, but it's just a tip of the iceberg here. Now, I want to mention right at the onset that any system, as you know, requires power, right? And it's not just the power consumption aspect of it, it is the fact that power needs to be brought into the system, and once the system has used power, the heat has to get dissipated out of the system. So power comes into the system, that's the power delivery, there's power consumed by the system, and then heat gets dissipated from the system. So in my first few minutes, I'm going to give a little bit of background, and this perhaps a lot of you are familiar with, and you might have studied this in physics back in high school, talking about what I call Ohm's law and the various components of it, okay, which is critical and fundamental, and I would say almost the ABCs of power delivery work that you need to know. When we talk about resistance, and I'm assuming that maybe some of you have heard of resistance and the others, so I'll just mention it as, yes, it is as the name indicates. It's an opposition to the flow of current, and that's what resistance is. It is measured in ohms, and what resistance is affected by is, 1, the material of the wire, 2, the cross-sectional area of the wire, how thick the wire is, what the width of the wire is, and the third component of it is how long the wire is. So resistivity is a property of the wire. You have the area and the length. Okay, so resistance is typically resistivity times the length divided by the area, as you see in the formula on the slide. Now, this is a very, very important component to know or remember, because the voltage that you have, or the voltage that you see across a wire, is essentially I times R, where I is the current, and R is the resistance. All right? So that's what resistance is. Now, in addition to resistance, another component of your impedance is something called inductance. Remember, I said resistance is opposition to the flow of charge or flow of current. Inductance is the material's opposition to the change in flow of charge. Okay, there's a difference there. One is the opposition to current, the other one is opposition to the change in the flow of current, okay? Now, the unit of this is Henry, and inductance, unlike resistance, is a more complex parameter because it depends on the overall current path. There are various components of it. There's something called self-inductance, which is essentially the inductance of the actual conductor in itself, which is proportional to the length, and it depends upon the geometry of the cross-section. 2, you have mutual inductance, which is the inductance between two conductors, and that's impacted by the distance between the two conductors. And another very important component is loop resistance, which is the inductance of a closed loop conductor, which is usually the biggest, I call it the perpetrator over here. That value is proportional to the loop area. So you can have this, if the area is bigger, then your loop inductance is bigger. So typically you bring wires closer to each other to reduce the loop inductance on the wires. All right? High inductance is not good for power delivery. High resistance is not good for power delivery. Remember I mentioned how resistance impacts your voltage drop, your voltage V equal to IR. Similarly, your inductance impacts your voltage drop as L di by dt. Di by dt is the change, the rate of change of current. Okay? So if you have high inductance, you essentially, the circuit, when I'm talking of circuit, I'm talking of transistors that switch, because if you remember, at the end of the day, everything is binary. All your computation, all your functionality is basically done in binary, and it's done with transistors switching, or circuitry switching on and off. And the faster they switch, the faster your computation happens. When you have high inductance, it reduces the switching speed. It creates what you call bounce, overshoot, and undershoot, and essentially increases your voltage supply fluctuation. So if you have to think about it in real life, sometimes you notice your lights are dimming when, say, there's a lightning strike or when there's a lot of thunder outside, and these are actually fluctuations that happen in the electricity that is being delivered on the grid. That is at a macro scale. Take that to the micro scale, and that's exactly what happens in a microprocessor too, and that's what you want to avoid. You want to make sure that your voltage is smooth so that your disruptions are minimized. Now, a third component that you have there is called capacitance. And capacitance, unlike resistance and unlike inductance, is essentially is good in terms of power delivery. It is the ability to store charge of a material. Okay, so its unit is in farads. And think of little reservoirs of charge. Little reservoirs of charge, that's what your capacitors are. They actually help in power supply management, unlike resistances and unlike inductances. So capacitors are charge reservoirs that provide charge to the power grid and to your circuitry when you need it. Doesn't give you all the charge that you need, but they're there to provide you small amounts of charge. And capacitors in any design are distributed along the entire power delivery system. You have the die, what we call the die, which is a microprocessor die. You have power coming into the die, but the power has to come from somewhere. It has to come from what you call a motherboard, right? So on a motherboard, you have something called a VRM, which is a voltage regulator module. And the voltage regulator module, think of it as your source of power supply. And from the voltage regulator module all the way to your circuits where the power is being distributed and delivered, you have capacitors sprinkled along the way. And this is a very important point to remember, because I'll get back when I talk about something called droops. It is the capacitors that actually help to minimize these droops in your power supply. All right, okay. Now, moving on, we talked about Ohm's law over here, and Ohm's law, as I said, is V equal to IZ, where V is your voltage, I is your current, and Z is your impedance. So when I expand that out, it's V is equal to I times R plus L di dt, where I is your current. And you don't have to remember everything over here, but this is just to let you know that these components are impacted by your resistance, your capacitance, and your inductance. So the voltage and the current that's flowing, there is a relationship between them. the two of them, and that's determined by the impedance in your path. And the impedance in your path comprises of your resistance, your inductance, and your capacitance. So V equal to IZ is if there's one thing that I want you to take away from today's talk is that Ohm's law is V equal to IZ, and that's the fundamental basis of any power delivery research that you look at subsequently. All right? So let's, maybe we should take a poll right now. Okay, so let's go on and based on what I said, let's see. If we say that the impedance of an electrical circuit is increased, what do you think will happen to the current, assuming the voltage remains the same? Will it increase? Will it decrease? Will it stay the same? Or D, I am unsure. So go ahead and enter your choice in the poll area where you can perhaps make your selection over there. And if you're having any trouble, perhaps type into the Q&A and someone will help you out. So remember, Ohm's law says V is equal to IZ. And so there is a relationship between your current, your impedance, and your voltage over there. So think about it. I think it is extremely important to understand that relationship, because if you have to prevent what I call an unruly power grid delivery system over there, then you need to understand the relationship between your current and your voltage and your impedance. Okay. All right. Another thing that you have to bear in mind, and this will subsequently, let's see whether the polls are done or they are still going on. Okay. Looks like it's still going on. So one thing that you want in your power delivery system, what are you looking for? You want a constant voltage supply. You don't want to see movement on your voltage supply because it impacts how your system is going to behave. You want it to be steady. In other words, you basically, not only do you want it to be steady, you also want it to be least impacted by your impedance. In other words, you typically would want lower impedance because that way you can get the same amount of current with lower voltage there. So let's see. I think the poll answers are in or probably not. Okay. Okay. So, all right. Okay, if that's going on. So let's see. What is the correct answer over here? If your impedance of the electrical circuit is increased, what happens to the current? The current will decrease, right? If your voltage remains the same. As you can see, there is a inverse relationship between current and impedance for the same voltage. What we are looking for over here is essentially to try and maintain the voltage as constant. So having said that, I'm going to move on to, I'm going to introduce, all right, so I just looked at the results over here. It is 100%. Everybody got it right. Thank you. Okay, so this is another very important concept just to understand, because you're going to hear people in this, working in this area, talking about first group, second group, third group, and what does that even mean? What does that even mean? All right, let's talk in very simplistic terms. When your transistor is switching, remember, because of the change, it changes the amount of current that's needed because it's switching. It says that I go from 0 to 1, so there is a change in the current. And because of inductance in the system, you're going to see a voltage drop. And remember that relationship L di dt? That causes or introduces a voltage drop in the system. Now, so when transistors switch or circuitry switches, immediately you will see a dip, which is what is essentially you see that happening, and that is referred to as a droop. So think of it as the first droop in the plot on the right that you're seeing on your screen right now. When that happens, you have capacitance that sits in a package. The package essentially sits above the die, and those capacitors, remember I told you that they're little reservoirs of charge? They wake up to deliver some amount of the charge that's needed, as a result of which the voltage begins to restore itself. Now, that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient. And as a result of that, once their charge is depleted, the voltage supply again begins to droop. And that causes what you call a second droop. And at that point, when there is a second droop, then there are capacitors in the bulk, in the motherboard, etc., that begin to wake up, and they begin to deliver the charge that's needed. It takes time because they're further away from your point of consumption. And as a result of that, you get some amount of restoration. But again, that's not enough to give you all the charge you need. And again, you have another dip in your power supply, which is referred to as the third droop. By the time you get to the third droop, that's when the voltage regulator module wakes up and says, okay, I need to adjust and give the circuitry what it needs, and therefore there is a restoration of your voltage. So that's what causes your first droop, your second droop, and your third droop, and that's because of the inductance in the path from the voltage regulator module to the circuitry on the die. What you want to eliminate or minimize is that inductance on the path to get a smooth voltage supply there. And remember, this is over and above the DC voltage drop caused by resistance, which is IR, that sits there as an absolute term. Okay, so that's the second concept that I'd like you all to take away from here is what droops are. And these things are important because when you talk about a power delivery system that needs to be well behaved. But before I do that, let's do a little poll over here. What do you think a well-behaved power grid is? Okay, the choices are whether it's a power grid that listens to directions like a well-behaved student, B, delivers predictable and desired voltage, C, delivers unpredictable but desired voltage, and D, I am unsure. So your poll lines are open here. Please go ahead and make your choices. And while you're doing so, let me give you a little bit of feeler on what a well-behaved power grid needs to be. A well-behaved power grid means, as I've been talking about, your voltage has to behave as you want it to be. You need to be in control about having a predictable voltage supply that is coming in. And, okay, I can see that everybody's got it right, so yes, and exactly what you are thinking. It needs to be something that can deliver, that's the goal, a predictable and desired voltage to all transistors across all operating conditions over the lifetime of the parts. Remember, all three are important. Yes, predictable. Yes, to all the transistors which are on the die, under all operating conditions and over the entire lifetime, not when you just buy your system, but over the entire lifetime. And what does that mean? It needs to have low impedance, which means low IR drop. It needs to have low DI/dt or inductance impact, which is low droop. Remember those two concepts that I've been constantly reiterating at this point. Okay, and there is something called electromigration. I'm not going into that, but you don't want your wires basically thinning out with time. So you basically want to minimize electromigration impact, or you want to make sure that it is reliable. Power delivery system impacts all aspects of your design. When I say that, what do I mean? Functionality, because if you don't have sufficient voltage, your system will not function. And even if you have sufficient voltage, if it's not enough, then your transistors are going to work slowly. In other words, it impacts your performance. C, if you have to dial up your voltage really, really high, you might cause your system to get really heated up, and that could impact the reliability of the system. And the other thing is that we are in a world where we're trying to minimize the power consumption, and you don't want to waste power. Here, the more impedance you have, the more you need to dial up your voltage to deliver the power, the performance you need. And when you increase your voltage, you increase your power supply consumption. As you perhaps know, that voltage is a direct component of power consumption, either as CV square S, which is your dynamic power, or your static power has a voltage component to it. Okay? Now, here is an example of your what a modern day power grid looks like. All right, so this one is a cartoon diagram on the right, but essentially sitting on the bottom of this, just imagine transistors are sitting on the bottom of the cartoon picture that you have on the right, and on the top is how the power enters. It enters with what you call bumps or pads. Essentially, we call them bumps, C4 bumps, where it stands for control, collapsed, chip, connections, 4 Cs over there. And essentially, power enters through those bumps. There are power and ground bumps essentially there, and then you have a gridded structure, and through the grid, it makes its way down from that entry point to the transistors that sit below. And I'm not talking about, in the past, we would have just talked about hundreds of transistors, and just to give you a perspective here, the Intel Haswell microprocessor, servo microprocessor that got introduced, may hit the market last year sometime, has over 10 billion transistors in there, just to give you a perspective of how many transistors need to get powered up and down when your chip is functioning. Okay, I'm going to give you just a sneak preview over here on how trends are moving along to essentially make it even more challenging to get a reliable power grid, or what you call a well-behaved power grid. One, as perhaps you're familiar with it, or it's called Moore's Law. You may have heard that term, but Moore's Law essentially says that you double your transistors every couple of years. So think about shrinking. Again, in the past, we spoke about just hundreds of transistors, and now we're talking not millions, but even billions of transistors. So with that, with so many transistors, you have to deliver much more power, much more power density, address that in a smaller area as the area of the transistors are increasing, and you get challenged over there as a result of that. Not only that, you have a trend with respect to wires and gates. Effectively, if your wire delays are increasing, then it's taking longer to deliver power along the wire to a given gate, because a gate, which is another word for transistor switching, that switches, but it's waiting for the power to come in. And then because the distribution is not going uniformly, suddenly your wire delays are becoming longer than your gate delays. The next thing is that I showed a cartoon picture of layers of metal through which the power gets delivered to the transistors. Those number of layers are actually increasing. You have increased number of layers. Again, the distance that the power has to travel is increasing. The wires are thinning. Remember, you have to go back to what impacts resistance, and that means the resistance is increasing. You have more restrictions on your wires in terms of how you design them, so you don't have that flexibility. As these dies are getting more and more complex, you have process variations, which means that it's hard to predict the behavior of your transistors across the die, because you have so many of them and different parts can behave differently, even if your simulations indicate that they should be behaving the same way. The C4 bumps that I showed you, there is a challenge in terms of how they are scaling. They are not scaling at the same rate as the transistors, and so that becomes a challenge. So technology, there are many, many technology challenges which are happening. They're all good in terms of perhaps getting the performance you need, packing in more, etc. But what is happening as a result of that, power delivery is getting challenged. So more and more research problems to work on over there. And this is not only on the technology front, but they give you a preview on the design front too. We are now looking at multi-core design, as some of you are familiar with. We used to go operate with a single core. Now we used to have dual cores, quad cores. Now we have more than quad cores, etc. Now we have to provide power to each of those cores. Those cores have different voltage domains to be working on rather than a single voltage domain. So the power delivery system is what needs to tailor to that. And so you get challenged from that regard in terms of how you can distribute the power, and what, because it's not very straightforward anymore. So there are challenges, there are technology challenges, there are design challenges. Wait, there's more. There's more. Doesn't stop there. There are tool challenges. When I say tool challenges, when you design such a complex microprocessor, you want to be able to know in advance how your system is going to be, because it's not that the system comes back, and that's the first time you understand how it works. You want to design it such that you know in advance how the system is going to work. So you need robust, what we call CAD tools, okay, which can help you design your power grid. But that is not enough. You need CAD tools to help design your grid. You need CAD tools to help analyze your grid. You need CAD tools to help verify your grid and validate that, yes, this is how it is actually going to behave. Not all of it is in there now. As a result of that, a lot of issues are found once the chip gets manufactured and comes back. You don't want that. You want to find everything, what the nitty-gritty details that need to be fixed before you actually send something out to be manufactured. Okay, so there are two challenges that you have to address here. So having said that, we need to tackle technology challenges, we need to tackle design challenges, we need to tackle tool challenges to avoid unruly power grid behavior here. And so we need to come up with all kinds of clever tricks to deal with these challenges over here. So the question is, can we develop easy ways to design and accurately and quickly analyze our increasingly complex power grid and what its role is in the power delivery system? So today's what I've talked about, again, is just a tip of the iceberg here. There are lots of research opportunities ahead, and there's a lot of exciting things to explore in this regard. And the more innovation we come up with in design, the more challenged we are in terms of guaranteeing that we have a fantastic, or what I call a well-behaved power delivery system to go with it. So having said that, maybe we have some time for questions?
Yes, thank you, Mandy, for really interesting. I think it is that time. We can take some questions from the audience, so you can enter your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side, and I'm going to start out with some questions that we already had. So, Mandy, what other chip design teams do you actually interact with?
Within Intel? Within Intel, I'm really very fortunate to interact with folks working on servers, folks working on, I call them servers, but microprocessor servers, the ones that sit in data centers, etc., to what we call client systems. Client systems are those on your desktop, to folks working in the mobile space, working in the tablet space. There are very, very many different products, and Intel is a little micro ecosystem in itself, and I get a chance to interact with all these product groups on a regular basis.
That's very cool. So what fields do you have to keep on top of to actually do this kind of research?
I'm sorry, what was that? Sorry, Laurie, can you repeat your question?
What fields do you have to, what knowledge do you need to keep up to date in order to do this kind of research?
Oh, gosh. First of all, I think rule number one is constantly keeping your eyes and ears open and constantly not losing the fact that you need to learn every day. And I think that is very, very critical to keep in mind because, as someone who works in a big organization, you're never the expert in everything. And to be able to do your job fully and completely, it's important to be able to absorb and learn from all the experts around you. So the skill set is constantly evolving and growing. But let me tell you this, I'm happy to know that it is, on a daily basis, I get to learn. And I go back to my fundamentals because your fundamentals need to be really, really strong because that's what is the basic infrastructure on which you build your contribution.
So that leads me to another question that was asked. What background does a student need to do this kind of research?
Definitely an introductory, your fundamentals need to be very, very strong. And what I mean by fundamentals is your math skills, your physics skills. If you go back to your high schools, if you understood your basics, beyond that point, and you have a quest to learn, you will do great. After that, you can learn, it's courses you learn. You can go to college, learn your courses over there, or you can adapt and learn on the job. You can take courses while you are in the company, but your fundamentals need to be absolutely clear. So basic math and basic physics are very critical in doing your job well.
Okay. So can you say anything about your team? Like what size is your team? What kind of people are on your team?
Yeah. I want to say my team is Intel. Because I work with so many different people. I work with people who are senior to me, people who are junior to me. I do have, and in my current role, I work a lot with academic researchers who are even outside. And depending upon the targeted area that I'm working on, it is what I have an Intel team and an academic research team. And I see myself as that conduit. And so, on a regular basis, I'm working with a lot of folks. So in addition to dabbling around with the technical aspect of it, there is the important communication aspect of it that I need to be on top of to do my job effectively.
Okay, so another question from actually it's probably our last question on this, so we can move on to the mentoring, would be what or who led you into going into this type of research?
Okay, I want to say I'm going to go back to my childhood days, and I want to say my dad has been a fabulous inspiration for me. And basic quest for learning was introduced by him. Even if it's not consciously, unconsciously, because I watched him. And so, having a role model at an early age or sometime is, and you can see what comes out of it is really important. At least for me, it has turned out to be really important. And when I got into this part, the satisfaction of seeing the outcome just only helped me further to move on in this direction. So.
Oh, great. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the mentoring.
Okay. All right. Should we? Yeah.
I think you can. Okay, so I will move the slide. So our mentoring topic for today is building your self-confidence. And we're going to start out with a poll. Mandy, do you want to lead this?
Sure, I can absolutely do that. Thank you, Laurie. So we're going to shift, as Laurie mentioned, shifting gears completely from the technical topic here into mentoring around self-confidence here. So I'd like to understand what you all think self-confidence means over here. And the polls are open. So go ahead and give your choice over here. Is it a feeling of trust in one's ability? Thinking you are the best? Feeling good about yourself, or how happy you are? So go ahead. The poll lines are open over here, and go ahead and take a stab on what you think self-confidence means. I do know that self-confidence means different things to different people, but I go with, essentially, at the end of the day, how you feel, but and how satisfied you are, how quote unquote confident you are. All of that definitely plays an important role into defining what self-confidence means. So, and while this poll is going on over here, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to go into the definition of what self-confidence means. And essentially, it is a feeling of trust in one's abilities, one's qualities, and judgment. You can have, it's qualitative here. You can have too little. And what does too little means? You may not take enough risk. It's a lack of success. And that's what is the outcome of not having enough confidence. And too much probably means there is a frequent failure to deliver, you're letting down colleagues, and you're probably taking on too much risk over there. Yes, I did see the poll results there, and most of them agree with a feeling of trust here. Some agree with feeling good about yourself, which I don't think is incorrect. I think it's important to also feel really good about yourself, but definitely a feeling of trust in one's abilities is an important and fundamental component of self-confidence. Now, there's two primary contributors over here: self-efficacy, which is believing in your capacity to produce an achievement, and self-esteem, your overall evaluation of yourself and your right to be happy. Okay, so having said that, how that we say that, let's have another poll on how do you think you rate your self-confidence? Very high, average, low, I'm not sure. So go ahead again. The polls are open over there. Go ahead and put your choices in. Let me go back and you can see your choices over there. Over in terms of where do you see yourself landing in terms of your self-confidence. And typically what I've seen, and while you all are entering your choices, is that if I were to look at a comparison, girls or women tend to have, quote-unquote, lower self-confidence compared to boys. And I even see this in middle school. And so when the teacher asks a question, the boys are the ones raising their hands. Of course, it's different when you are the only girl in your class, which is what I was in college. But on an average, boys tend to have higher self-confidence than girls do. But let's see what the rating is here. Okay, so we land up 40% high, very high. That's 20% high on an average. There's 20% saying they're average and 20% saying, I am not sure. Okay, the good news is nobody thinks their self-confidence is low, which is good. All right, okay, so having said that, so how self-confident are you? You can actually decide that, when you have high self-confidence. Let's see what some of the check marks, some of the points that you want to check yourself against. Do you believe to be right even if you are criticized for it? Okay, that's one. Are you willing to take risks? Are you willing to admit your mistakes and learn from them? Do you extol your virtues often? And do you accept compliments graciously? Thank you, I've worked really hard on that paper. Right, these are all hallmarks of someone with high self-confidence. What about someone with not so high, low self-confidence over there? When your behavior is governed based on what others would think, okay, when you wish to stay in your comfort zone, when you work really hard to cover your mistakes, then when you're always waiting for others to congratulate you, and then when you dismiss compliments as, oh, that paper was really nothing, anyone could have done it, where you're dismissing your ability to actually do something that is not easily accomplished. Having said that, I just thought I would call out some, and I want to say 20-plus actions because we could add more to this list over here to boost your self-confidence. And these are some things that, again, very small things that are important to essentially making sure that, where did I lose my connection? Okay, thank you. To actually making sure that you can improve your self-confidence a little bit more. Rule number one is think and act positive. I think that is really important. And I called out kill negative thoughts as explicitly because to me they're two different things. I cannot do something. That's not possible. That's not going to happen. Those are all negative thoughts. Stop that. Replace them with, if I try, maybe I'll be able to do it. If I try, maybe I'm going to be able to understand these concepts. If I ask people, maybe that's how I will understand because I did not understand what's in class. Think and act positive, and you will be surprised how much of a difference that would make. Another thing is, as I say, is groom yourself. Nobody's telling you to wear the most trendy clothes, etc. But at least you will feel better about yourself if maybe your hair is combed, you've washed your face, your teeth are brushed, you're not in sweaty clothes all the time. Typically, when you're getting into a research mode, you just don't have time for things. You don't have time for that. But you'll really feel better about yourself if you actually groom yourself. Another thing is be prepared. Whatever might be the case, if you have a chance, prepare for a talk that's coming up, prepare for a test, prepare. It's hard to be confident there. I know there are people who are confident, without preparation. They say, okay, we will wing it. We will, but trust me, those people prepared, they wouldn't just say we'll wing it. Their confidence level would be probably 2x or 3x higher there. Another thing is be generous and kind. It's always a part of it. It's think about, be sensitive to your environment. An important thing that I sprinkle through the list is over here is know your principles and live by them. That is such an important thing. Believe in yourself. Believe in what you think and live by them. Know what is right. Be ethical. Again, back to, standing tall. Sitting slouched tends to have an impact on your confidence. So stand tall when you get a chance in fact, whenever you get a chance, prop yourself up and stand tall. Another thing is try to speak slowly so that the other person understands. Sometimes people find themselves, when they are nervous, they start speaking really fast so that the other person cannot get what they're saying. So slow down, speak slowly. Okay? Increase your competence. Try to take small steps to increase your competence. Set a small goal and achieve it. Let me give you an example over here. The kind of jobs that we do, we typically tend to sit in front of the desk and work all day, and that typically causes a sedentary kind of, you tend to get into a sedentary mode for the day where you're stiff, not moving, etc. So I told myself when I am doing or taking meetings where I don't need to be in front of my computer, I'm going to start walking. And this was a mini step. It was a small step. And I started with, say, walks. Again, now you have many props that allow you to achieve these small goals. So I took a little, my Fitbit and began tracking, which I still have here. And I track how many steps I take. It's a small goal that you set. And the moment you achieve it, you put a little check mark there. Yes, I can do it. I can find ways to do it. Not necessarily everybody, the same way works for everyone, but set your goal and achieve it. Recognize when there is a problem. Find support. Then change a small habit. Change a small habit. I can take it in many steps. Nobody's telling you to move a mountain, but take many steps to perhaps change a small habit. And don't focus on solutions, and that ties into, kill negative thoughts. Think and act positive. How can I solve a situation rather than mull and mope over a problem? Volunteer when you get a chance. Raise your hand up and say, yes, maybe I can help out over here. Again, that's great for self-confidence. Again, as part of what I was saying with avoiding a sedentary lifestyle, try to be active and try to exercise. And again, in this kind of professions that we are in, typically you tend to be sitting in front of your desk, but take that moment, try to be active, and then importantly, do something that you have been procrastinating over, something that you want to avoid. Try, get it done. Work on small things. And this is, I'm guilty of this, and I try to keep my desk clear. Your clear desk means clear thoughts. One that I definitely wanted to put in over here is don't let men allow you to think that they are better than you. That typically tends to happen. Again, as I was mentioning, even at the school level, you see boys raising their hands up. Girls get a little intimidated. They don't raise their hands. They think they don't know. But trust me, a lot of times that's the opposite is true. And so, but don't ever put yourself down. And always remember, smile. You will definitely feel better when you smile. Okay, so some of these things, even if you don't remember the 20+ actions moving on ahead, remember one thing is when you get a chance, smile. You will feel better. It will boost your confidence, self-confidence ahead. A couple of things I want to talk about here. One is beware of the imposter syndrome. What is that? This is very common amongst women, particularly because regardless of success that you've got or that the fact that you're actually competent, you're convinced that you do not deserve it. The proof is dismissed as luck, it's timing, a result of deceiving others into believing, whatever it is, And it is common among successful women and typically amongst those in academics. It is widely found amongst graduate students, first-generation college students, etc. No, it's not good enough. I don't know how that happened. Oh, boy, I'm lucky. No, give yourself some credit. You get something there. You get here. You're at this stage right now because you deserve it. So just watch out for that and just put a scratch out. That's a negative thought that you should scratch out of your mind. Okay? no one will believe in you unless you believe in yourself. And I put in this quote from Walt Disney here. Somehow, I can't believe that there are any heights that can't be scaled by someone who knows the secret of making dreams come true. This special secret, it seems to me, can be summarized in the 4 C's, which are curiosity, confidence, courage, and constancy. And the greatest of all is confidence. When you believe in a thing, believe in it all the way, implicitly and without question. So believe in yourself. Your self-confidence is going to be so much higher. So I think that's, we're almost out of time here, right? So
we have one question for you.
Okay.
The question is, is it good to be too self-confident?
Is it good to be too self-confident? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's one question we can ask about self-confidence.
Yeah. Is it okay? Let me see if I got that question correctly. Is it good to be too self-confident? Remember when I talked about it? The challenge is how will you quantify what is too self-confident, right? You will base it based on your results and the outcome of what is happening. That's when you dial back. If you find yourself failing because of too many risks you're taking because you think you can achieve all of it and that's not happening, maybe you dial back a little bit. Maybe that's a sign of too much self-confidence. So you always gauge it on the outcome of how you're doing. If you're finding yourself uncomfortable because of things that you've tried and it's not going right, back off. There is no single solution that works for everyone. It is you, yourself, and chartering your own path forward, making sure that you are happy and you're enjoying it along the way. And as long as you're doing that correctly, you are adequately self-confident.
Great advice. Okay, so we don't run out of time. We don't have much time for more questions. So I just want to tell you about the scholarship opportunity. This is for both women, bachelor's and master's students who are studying cybersecurity. So it is the Scholarship for Women Studying Information Security, or SWSIS. And these scholarships you can get from $5,000 to $10,000 each year. So CRA-W is in partnership with the ACSA, and it's sponsored from the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So the scholarship applications are now open, and we suggest that you go to swsis.org if you're interested in applying for them. We would very much like to have your feedback on, in this particular poll, we're asking for feedback on the self-confidence mentoring session. So please answer this poll. Did this mentoring session help answer your questions about building self-confidence? Yes, no, I still have questions. If you still have questions, then you can tweet us at CRA-Women using the hashtag #UGradTH. Okay, so you have 100% that said they've learned a lot today. So let's move on to our closing slide. We also want your feedback on a survey. So we've just started these series this year, and we'd really like to get your feedback on how this whole undergrad town hall is working. And so we really want you to take this survey after the event ends. So we hope that you've enjoyed this virtual undergrad town hall. Our next one is coming up in April, so stay tuned to both Twitter and CRA-W.org to find out more about them. So we want to thank you from all of us at CRA-W, and and the CRA itself. So CRA-W is a committee of the CRA. We also want to inform you of some of these resources that we have. And again, it's CRA-W.org. There are tons of resources there for you. So thank you, and have a nice evening.